Did you just get a bunch of really long forms in the mail from Social Security? I have previously done a video on the function reports, but on this video, we're going to be walking through the work history form. We're going to do it step by step so that you understand what these questions mean and what Social Security is looking for when you fill out this form. I will link to the function report video down below in the comments. Hey friends, and welcome back to my channel for Georgia Advocate Partners. If we haven't met yet, my name is Jennifer Jarvis and I'm a Social Security disability attorney. On this channel, I have made it my mission to pull back the curtain and to demystify what is going on at the Social Security Administration when you apply for disability benefits. I am here to help you through the process so that you can understand what they are looking for so that you can have the best possible chance of having your claim approved. Of course, nothing here creates an attorney-client relationship, and this is not legal advice. I do highly encourage you, though, to seek out your own attorney for your particular case. And with that, on to the video. Okay, so you got these forms in the mail. They are thick, they have many pages, they are very overwhelming. Do not worry, we're going to take it one step at a time, just like I'm sitting down next to you, and we're going to fill out these forms together. You should have gotten 2 to 3 forms in the mail, and if you only got one, then the others are probably on the way. But typically, what Social Security is going to do is send out 3 forms when they start to evaluate your case. They're going to send out the adult function report, they're going to fill out the third-party adult function report, and they're going to send out the work history report. So today, we are going to address the work history report. The form number that would be in the upper left-hand corner should be SSA 3369. This is another giant form in which Social Security is going to get information from you. That information is going to be reviewed by your claims adjuster and may be reviewed by other people internally at the Social Security Administration. If you end up at a hearing, it will also be reviewed by the ALJ or administrative law judge and the VE, which is the vocational expert who may be called to testify at your hearing. So the first thing I want to address when looking at this form is, why is Social Security asking you for all of this information? And you may be thinking that you've already given them this information because when you applied, you had to tell them about the jobs that you used to have. As you may know by doing other Google searches or maybe watching some of my videos, there is a 5-step process in which Social Security determines whether or not someone is disabled. This is also sometimes referred to as the sequential process. At step 4 of 5, Social Security is going to evaluate what they call your past relevant work. And they're going to determine whether or not they think you could return to any of your past relevant work. And they're also going to determine whether or not you gained any skills in that job that could be potentially transferred to a different job. And I know this feels stupid. You're probably thinking, well, if I could return to any of my previous work, then I would not be applying for disability. I understand that, but this is part of the process. So past relevant work has a definition from the Social Security Administration, and it is defined as the work that you have performed in the last 5 years that you did long enough to learn how to do the job. Now, if you've been doing Google searches, you may come across other websites that say, well, it's the last 15 years of work. Social Security changed that within the last year or two. They're now only looking at the last 5 years. And the other important part of that is that you did long enough to learn how to do that job. So if you only lasted 2 days at a particular job before you either couldn't do the job or you got fired, that is likely not going to be considered past relevant work because you would not have learned how to do it, and I would not put that on the form. If you lasted at a job 2 months, but it was a simple job and you did learn how to do that, then it could be classified as past relevant work, and I would put that on the form. So before we get started putting those on the form, though, I also want to give you some framework as to how Social Security classifies work, and that has to do with the standards from the Department of Labor. And the reason we want to go over all of this is because it will clue you in as to why Social Security is asking you some of these really strange questions like, well, how much did I sit and how much did I stand and how much weight did I have to lift? And that's because the Department of Labor classifies all work in the national economy based, 1, on its physical exertional level, and 2, on the mental exertional level. So on the physical side, jobs are classified from sedentary, which is the low end of exertion. That's a primarily sit-down job, all the way through light, medium, heavy, and very heavy. The main difference between those jobs is the amount of sitting, standing, walking, pushing, pulling, and lifting things that you are required to do. Now, when I talk about lifting, I do not mean, well, I had to lift, 250-pound items and I used this winch or I used a jack hoist. I'm talking about the force that you personally actually had to use to lift an object. Did you lift 50-pound boxes? Did you pick up 20-pound boxes? That's what I mean. So to put more details out there, here are the actual definitions from the Social Security Administration, which are based on general labor definitions. So the first is sedentary work. Sedentary work is considered to be primarily sitting with occasional standing or walking. It may involve lifting or carrying up to 10 pounds. Occasional is defined as up to a third of the workday. So most of these jobs, because you're sitting at a desk or you're sitting at an assembly table, are going to require good use of hands and fingers for repetitive work, but the amount of lifting you do isn't a lot. The next one up is light work, and a lot of jobs are performed at the light level. That requires standing or walking for a prolonged period, which the Social Security Administration defines as 6 hours, and frequently lifting and carrying 10 pounds. So that's like two-thirds of your day, and up to 20 pounds occasionally. So a lot of work falls into the light work category. A cashier is considered a light work job. Any sort of a job where you're standing behind a counter and you're interacting with the public is probably going to be a light work job. Medium work, which is the next one up, is standing or walking again for those same prolonged 6 hours. But now we are frequently lifting and carrying up to 25 pounds and occasionally up to 50 pounds. A lot of your heavier type jobs that have to do with like maybe in the warehouse or sometimes on certain assembly lines or even working in like say UPS or the Federal Postal Service would be something that's more of a medium level job. Then we move into heavy, which is the same, except now we're occasionally lifting up to 100 pounds and frequently lifting 50. And then very heavy, which is like 100 pounds and higher. So that's kind of how we define all of those exertional levels. Most jobs in the national economy are going to be at the bottom three, sedentary, light, or medium, depending on what you were asked to pick up and how much time you spent on your feet. The Social Security Administration is also going to evaluate the mental abilities that are required to learn a job, and this is defined as the amount of time it takes to learn. So in general, you're going to have unskilled jobs, semi-skilled jobs, and skilled jobs. So they define unskilled work as work which requires very little judgment. You're doing simple jobs that can be learned in a short period of time. So that's usually less than 30 days. And importantly, a worker does not gain skills working at an unskilled job. Semi-skilled work is one which requires some skills, but does not require more complex work duties. And skilled work requires qualifications where you're using judgment. You've got a lot of factors. It's more abstract, usually requires degrees and higher education. So let's look at some common examples putting these two things together. A fast food worker is considered a light job and unskilled. Some of the cook jobs in the back where maybe you're lifting heavier boxes may fall into more of the light to medium type category. If you're a welder, that is considered medium and skilled. It takes a long time to learn how to be a good welder. A cashier is considered light and unskilled. An attorney, such as myself, that's considered sedentary and skilled. So when Social Security is asking you to fill out the work history form, they are asking you to classify your past work, and this is why they are asking you these questions. They're trying to determine what kind of skills you required to learn in order to do this job and how physically and mentally demanding it was. All right, so now that we know why Social Security is asking you to fill out this form, let's turn to the form. And I'm going to start off with tip number one. Just like in the function report, I would really recommend that you answer these questions on a separate sheet of paper, kind of a rough draft. That way, if you want to change something, it doesn't matter how messy your rough draft is, and then you can copy it over to the nice form. Also, sometimes I know when we're thinking back through our jobs, we're like, oh yeah, I worked that one job for 6 months in between these other two jobs, and maybe you forgot about that one. So it's really nice to kind of do this in a rough draft version first, and then transfer it over. So get the page one, and in the top corner, it's going to be labeled as pages 3 out of 14. So in this form under section 1, you're going to fill out your name, your social security number, and your daytime phone number. They want your phone number in case they have some follow-up questions about your responses. Maybe something wasn't very clear and they need to get some more information. At the bottom of the form, they have a chart for you to fill in about the jobs you had. Sometimes you'll receive this form with some of those already filled out. If they did, they got that information from your original application. Because if you remember when you applied, you had to tell them about your jobs. So that may be where that information is coming from. If you feel like that information is incorrect, feel free to correct that on the form. Maybe when you filled out your application, you forgot about a couple of jobs, or maybe it's just not quite correct. But basically, what you're going to do is your absolute best to fill out this chart with all of your past work for the last 5 years, starting with the one that you had most recently. So this would be the last job that you had before you decided to file for disability. And then you're going to do your best to fill in the dates that you worked the job. It does not have to be perfect. If you don't remember exactly, you can just do your best. But what you want to do is you want to work backwards from top to bottom until you have filled in all of your jobs for the last 5 years. As the form notes, you don't have to fill in any job that you had for less than 30 days. You do need to include work for the same employer where you may have changed jobs. So if you started maybe at a restaurant as a waitress and then eventually maybe you became the bartender, those are classified as two different jobs. And so you would want to put those two in separately. You also need to include any self-employment and any work that may have occurred in a foreign country. So under job title, you're going to put down what your job was. Were you a cashier? Did you do customer service? Did you do telephone solicitation? Were you an oil change technician or were you a manager? Okay. And so what we're going to do now is we are going to talk about manager and the use of the word manager. And we're going to have a sidebar about that. And I'm actually going to call it tip number 2. And that is, were you really a manager? So a lot of people like to put on their forms that they were a manager. I was a shift manager. I was an assistant manager. Please be very careful about doing this. Saying that you were a manager implies a higher level of skill and training that may open you up to a transferable skills analysis. You want to avoid that if you can. If you were simply a shift lead, you were probably not a manager. If you simply had keys to open or close the store, you were likely not a manager. Managers are typically going to have hiring and firing duties as well as schedule making duties. If you did not do these things, I would really suggest you don't put yourself down as a manager. Now, if you were a manager and you did hire and fire and you did make shifts and you did all of that stuff, well, then you were, and you need to put that on the form. But if you did not, don't put yourself down as a manager. The other thing too that people will say, well, yeah, I got input on hiring and firing. Having input on whether or not somebody was hired or fired is not the same thing as I'm the one who actually made the decision. So I have a lot of clients who could have input, but ultimately it was somebody higher up who actually made the decision. So again, do not put down you were a manager if you did not have hiring or firing duties. So I just want you to be really careful, because I have clients who put, well, I was a manager and I supervised 20 people and I did this and this and this and this. But in reality, they really didn't. And so now we're at a hearing, and now we're trying to figure out whether or not this was unskilled work, semi-skilled work, or skilled work. And if you are a manager, an actual manager who's hiring and firing and calling up people and doing the schedules and doing the actual work as a manager, that a lot of times is a skilled job, which opens you up to transferable skills into other types of management jobs. And it can complicate a disability finding. Again, don't lie on the form, but be careful about using the word manager. Okay, so now that we've had that sidebar and that tip, let's get back to the chart. So you're going to finish filling this in with your jobs. If you have more jobs than will fit in this chart, you can continue your list under that last section under remarks, or you can continue it onto a separate sheet of paper. Okay, so that's the first page. Now what you're going to do is flip the page, and for each of the jobs that you listed, you're going to give a whole lot more information about that job. So the first one says job title 1. That's going to be your most recent job. So I'm now on the next page. So for purposes of this example, I'm going to say that I was a cashier at our local Kroger grocery store. So I'm going to put in cashier at Kroger. My rate of pay is $13 an hour, and I worked 8 hours per day, 5 days a week. So that's how you're going to fill in that first line. The next big section asks you about your typical tasks. So I want you to really think about what were all of the things that you had to do in your job. So I'm imagining myself standing there as a cashier at Kroger. So of course, the first thing they do is they ask you how you're doing and did you find everything you need? And if there's any customer queries or complaints, you're kind of the first line person there. So you have to greet and assist customers. You have to process transactions, cash, credit, check, debit, SNAP, EBT. You have to adhere to company policies, check IDs as necessary if somebody's buying alcohol or tobacco products. You're going to have to follow company policies on coupons and pricing. You're going to have to ensure that the price that gets rung up is the price that was over in the aisles, and if there's not, who to call and how to fix that. And depending, you may also have to keep your station clean. And I know in some grocery stores, you also have to bag groceries, especially if everybody is short-staffed. So you got to think about all of those things that you were asked to do, even though being a cashier sounds like you should just write one line. You were probably asked to do quite a few tasks, even in what's considered an unskilled job. So the next one asks, did you complete any reports? Certainly as a cashier, you're not really completing any reports. I think sometimes they ask you to do things about coupons, sometimes they don't, but you just need to think about your job and were you asked to do reports and file reports at the end of the day or maybe weekly? The next one has to do with supervising others. As a cashier, I did not do any supervising. But if you were a shift lead, you may want to put on here that you were a shift lead and you supervised 3 other people in the store and answered questions. Maybe your job was to kind of direct them to additional tasks to perform. Machines and tools. This is obviously going to depend on your job, but as a cashier, I have to work the cash register. I have to be able to work the credit card machines. I have to be able to work that conveyor belt and any other number of machines, the thing that weighs the produce, any number of machines that you had to interact with, you're going to put that there. Of course, again, this is obviously very job dependent. Did you ever have to work with coworkers, the public, or anyone else? Certainly as a cashier, that is a big red yes. And then it's going to ask you to describe it. So if I'm a cashier, obviously I'm interacting with customers. I'm interacting with my coworkers. That could be other cashiers. It could be baggers. It could be management. I'm also generally interacting with others for the entirety of my job. And I will tell you that 99% of jobs are going to require you to interact with somebody at some form. Unless you are maybe completely self-employed and completely independent, but you're still going to have customers. So at some point, in your job, you're likely interacting with others. The amount obviously depends. Okay, so that's that part of this form. And now we're going to get to what I consider a really confusing chart, trips up a lot of my clients. Social Security wants to know how much time you spent out of an 8-hour workday doing the following tasks. So again, we're thinking about this as a percentage of your day, as the number of minutes per day. And so when I answer this, I'm going to figure that I have a 30-minute meal break and 2 15-minute shift breaks where I'm allowed to go to the break room. Obviously, you're going to change that depending on your job. We'll just say in my cashier job, that's the way my shifts work. So tip number 3, for the section on sitting, standing, and walking, the total there should be equal to the number of hours on your shift. So if I work an 8-hour shift at the grocery store, for standing and walking, I'm going to put 7 hours because I'm standing at a cash register and I only get the 15, 30, and 15 breaks. For sitting, I'm going to put 1 hour during breaks only. So that way it's very clear that I am not allowed to sit on my job as a cashier. All right, so now we're going to break that down into more specifics. How much of that time did I spend stooping, kneeling, crouching, crawling? So stooping is defined by the Social Security Administration as bending forward at the waist. So if you see something on the floor that you're going to bend over and pick up, that's stooping. Kneeling, of course, is putting your knees on the floor. Crouching is where you're going to bend down and bend your knees and bend your hips. So you're not actually putting your knees on the floor, but you're crouching down. Crawling, of course, is self-explanatory. So for my job as a cashier, I occasionally am going to have to bend over and pick up something. So I put down 10 minutes of my job. I spend stooping, but I don't kneel, crouch, or crawl as a cashier. Using fingers. So as a cashier, I have to think about how am I using my hands as I'm doing my job. And in my head, I'm doing one of those jobs where you had to type on the keyboard with the right and you're moving the food over on your left. So I put down 7 hours and I use one hand using my fingers. And for my hand, I'm going to put 7 hours using one hand because that's me moving the items on the belt. Depending on how you do your job, this could also be 7 hours in both hands. All right, so now we're talking about reaching. So reaching at or below the shoulder, that's going to be reaching out on the workspace in front of you or reaching straight out in front of you versus reaching overhead where you're having to put your arms up over your head. Social Security separates those when they talk about the exertion of a job. So what I'm going to say is for my job as a cashier, I'm using two arms, 7 hours a day reaching. I'm either reaching for the keyboard or I'm reaching for the items that I'm putting on the scan belt. Reaching overhead as a cashier, I'm not doing that a whole lot. So I just put both arms in 10 minutes. I'm sure there were occasional times I needed to reach over my head. Climbing stairs or ramps, none. Climbing ladders, ropes, or scaffolds, none. I do want to put on here, though, if you are utilizing a step stool. So if you're having to go into the back areas, maybe you're working at a shoe store and you have to climb up on the step stool to reach the shoes, you're going to want to put on there either that you climbed ladders and you can put a note step stool, or maybe some of those back stock rooms you were actually climbing ladders. So don't forget about that. Lifting and carrying. As a cashier, I may have to lift some items and hand them to the customer. I may have to carry my register's tray to and from the main office. Maybe it's 50 feet. So I would want to put that here. My heaviest weight lifted as a cashier, maybe 20 pounds. I'm thinking about having to move maybe bigger bags of dog food or those flats of water, 2-liter bottles of soda. But frequently, I'm only lifting up to 10 pounds. Okay, so basically, you're giving them an overview of what you are physically doing all day long. So the next question asks, did this job expose you to any of the following? And so you would check, if this was a primarily outdoor job. So maybe you were a landscaper, or hazardous substances if you were an oil change mechanic and you were constantly interacting with oil and antifreeze and other types of substances like that. If you were exposed to either extreme heat or extreme cold that's not weather related. So for example, if you worked in a food processing plant where you had to go in and out of freezers, that would be extreme cold that's not weather related. And so you would want to fill this in as well as discussing where you were exposed to any of those environmental hazards. Certainly the job as the cashier at Kroger, then there's not going to be any of those. And so you're going to leave that section blank. All right. And now they're going to ask you, why can't you do this job? So why can't I return to my job as a cashier? And so here is tip number 4. They are not asking you to list your diagnoses. You do not want to put on here, I can't be a cashier because I had a heart attack. I can't be here because I have diabetes. What they want to know is, what is it about your condition that means you can't do this job? So let's say that this is me again working as the cashier. I'm going to say that I have a failed knee replacement and I have diabetic neuropathy in my feet. So I'm going to put that, but I'm not going to end with that. I'm going to say, because of those medical conditions, standing is very painful. My knee hurts and throbs the longer I stand in one place, and the tingling in my feet is extremely painful and unbearable. I cannot stand behind a cash register for more than 15 minutes before I need to sit down and take a break. So that is the reason I can't do my cashier job. It's not because I have diabetic neuropathy, but it's because my feet hurt so bad I can't stand there. And that's what Social Security is asking. They want to know why physically or mentally, if you've got brain fog or other things going on, can't you do this job? And that is it. That is what Social Security is asking for. So we have now completed all of the information they need for job number 1. You are now going to repeat this process for each of the jobs that you had during the last 5 years prior to your application. If you need more pages, if you had more than the jobs that are there, it gives you places for 5. You're just going to add on additional sheets of paper in which you answer all of those same questions about all of the jobs that you had for the last 5 years. The very last page asks you for additional remarks. If you feel like something you said needs a better explanation, I would put it there. Maybe you had an unusual job or job that had you do multiple tasks. We sometimes call those composite jobs. A really good example of that is working at a convenience store. Convenience stores are kind of composite jobs because you are working behind the cash register. A lot of times you're also stocking shelves. You're also cleaning up bathrooms and you're cleaning around the gas pumps. So you kind of have multiple jobs within that one job working at a convenience store. So if you don't feel like what you put on there was adequate, you can always add some things with additional remarks. You can also add some things with additional pages. And then at the bottom of the last page, you just want to put in that you completed the form. So if you are the person in 1A, so then you just check that box. But if someone else had to help you with this form, then that person needs to fill in the box there at the bottom. And then I think it's really important that if somebody else did this, I want you to go up to that additional remarks and I want you to put why somebody else had to help you with this form. Could you not understand the questions? Can you not write that much due to arthritis or neuropathy in your hands? Do you have problems remembering things? So for whatever reason that you had to have help, I want you to put that in the remarks, okay? All right, and we are now done with the work history report. I hope that that was helpful, and I hope it gives you a better idea of how to fill out the form and what Social Security is looking for. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. It helps me to keep making videos for you. If there are any particular topics that you would like have covered, please drop me a note at georgiaadvocatepartners.com or down below. If you are in the Georgia area and would like representation, please reach out, and I will see you next time.